Welcome. My name is Teresa McIntyre. I am the Assessment Development Coordinator. Um, I have been previously the Elementary Language Arts Assessment Specialist over Acadience Reading. And then I will be joined shortly by Jared Wright. He is presenting at a science meeting and hopefully will be here soon. So he is over elementary math and science assessments, including Acadience math. So our learning intention today is that you are really learning about using Acadience reports and analyzing student data from the beginning to the middle of the year. And you're going to be looking at whether or not you're successful if you can analyze student composite scores, analyze your effectiveness of instruction report, analyze your effectiveness through pathways and the growth element of for students, and then determining next instructional steps. So middle of the year is the right time to change instructional course. So you have time to look at that data and look at what is happening for students. And then we have enough time to make some changes to hopefully benefit students and impact their growth and their literacy and numeracy skills. Acadience looks at through their outcomes-driven model, where we are looking at identifying potentially need for support for students, and then definitely reviewing outcomes and seeing what has happened during this first half of the school year. So we're going to start by analyzing our composite score data. So this is looking at the rainbow view within composite score data and giving you an overall look at the benchmark levels for students. And the little rainbows, when I pull up the data view, you can either hover over the data rainbows, or I'll show you to print them. So it's kind of going to be your choice. But when you're looking at this data, what you're looking at is the percent and number of students in each different benchmark category, whether that is well below, at, or above benchmark. And then adding up the percent of students at below or well below benchmark, and then this percent of students at or above benchmark. And then we're going to be looking at that data and doing some analysis and thinking about what has happened. So for this example, we can see that there was a slight drop in the percent of students at or above benchmark in comparison to before, but we also can see that there was an increase in the student population. So that might be that reason. It might not be any particular students. We can also see that the majority of students maintained their status. And for our at and above benchmark students, that's great. That's exactly what we want to see. We want to see students maintaining their at or above benchmark status. For our well below and below benchmark students, that's a concern because we didn't see them changing levels at all. We didn't see them improving their benchmark scores, and they stayed pretty much the same. So I would say my core instruction is pretty effective in the fact that I'm maintaining my at and above benchmark students, but my interventions might not be working as well because I'm not seeing movement for my well below or below benchmark students to improve. So you can see the composite score in two different ways within ALO. You can go to your student list view, and that's going to show you that information. And if you really want to dive into the student level, or that main dashboard is going to really show you what it looks like at the whole class level. So let me share, make sure this moved over. When I'm looking at this main dashboard, and this is what comes up when you first log into ALO. Don't select my district, don't select anything, and you're going to see this benchmark assessment at the top. And if I hover over the rainbow, it's going to give me the number of students, which would be 6, and then the percent, which would be 30%. The other thing you can do is from this view, go up to your browser and choose print. And then it's going to save it. And it's going to then show you the data with the percents and the numbers of students printed out on the page. And then you could save this and use this to reference, or you can just use the dynamic view and hover over it and then input your data for your composite scores. Either one works just fine. If you hover over it and choose View Details, it's going to provide you the names of the specific students that are in that individual benchmark level. So you're looking at your beginning of the year to middle of the year. If you still use ADM, you're going to be looking at that classroom report. So in your participants notebook, and I will drop that in the chat again for those of you who just joined, please make a copy. On pages 2 and 3, you will see a chance to look at and analyze, put in your information for your reading and for your math. So if you have time, you can do both, or if you want to choose one to start with and then work on the other one, that is totally fine. And that's up to you as to which order and how you would like to do that. We did include a space to add students' names into each category. When you're adding the student's name, you're adding where they are at the middle of the year, not where they started at the beginning of the year. So you're putting in your percents for beginning and middle of year and then adding students' names for that middle of the year option. If you don't have time, you don't have to add the student names. You can still analyze the data and be thinking about that. Okay. Questions about that benchmark composite score analysis. So you're just putting in the percentages and the number of students from those composite score rainbows. Yep. I'm going to go ahead and start the timer and give you 8 minutes of time to work on this. I just want to briefly go over what is Tier 1 instruction. So all students are assessed at the benchmark. Tier 1 instruction is universal instruction for all students. Should be using those research-based effective materials. You can provide that as a whole class or within small groups or a combination. Your differentiating is needed for students, scaffolding to help them be successful and access the grade level material. The recommendation for literacy, including rating, is 120 minutes for students in grades K through 6 with full day K, and then half day K is 80 minutes a day. So as you're thinking about your Tier 1 instruction and thinking about how much time that you have in your schedule for providing literacy instruction, if it is less than that 120 minutes recommended, significantly less, that could be impacting things and could be a reason why you might not see as positive results in your composite score data. And then for math, recommended K through 2 for 60 minutes a day and 3 through 6 for 90 minutes a day. So we're going to take some time to reflect on your composite score data. So page 4 in your participant's notebook, there are just 4 questions for thinking about how have your scores, did they increase, decrease, stay the same? If you did see success, what led to that success? If you saw a drop, evaluate your practice. Think about what changes you could make to core instruction. So thinking about how much time are you spending on overall in literacy? How much time are students actually spending reading? So in first grade, at that middle of the year, students have to read connected text, right? They have the fluency passages. So how much time were you spending at the beginning, that first half of the year, for students actually reading connected text on their own? what changes could you make to core instruction to help increase, especially if you saw a drop in your at or above benchmark numbers? And then based on composite scores, are maybe some students who dropped that are going to be needing interventions now that weren't beforehand. So we're going to give you 5 minutes to go through those 4 questions and looking and analyzing your composite score data. Back. So we're going to go ahead and go into a breakout room. And while you're in this breakout room, I want you to go ahead and discuss what are next steps that you can take, right? Like what's going on with your students and thinking about what can I do to make make learning and instruction more effective. And I'm going to go ahead and put everybody into some breakout rooms. And so you'll have about 10 minutes and just talking about tier one instruction. If you had students whose scores decreased or stayed the same, what can you do to tier one instruction and within that to help increase literacy and numeracy scores? So it should move you directly into a breakout room. Hey, Jared, it looks like everybody is back now.
Hey, just said anything, but I'm Jared Wright. Sorry, I had some meetings and was a little late. But uh, it's called The Effectiveness of Instructional Support. And we're going to get some information around our core instruction, which Teresa was talking with you about, the tier one instruction, and then strategic and intensive support, and see is that support being effective? So let's jump into what we're going to look at. So the way that the next 2 slides are, I guess, created is the top half is just an enlarged portion of the report. And then the bottom half is from a table that is in the participant guide. So this all in one is not a report. It's half and half. So in the participant notebook, that's where it's taken from. And then you have the report. So if you're in ALO, the report we're looking at is called Effectiveness of Instructional Support. And it's a new one for middle of year. So students have 2 benchmark scores, and then this report starts to populate. So the way the report is designed, let's jump back here. The way the report is designed is that the top little peel-shaped thing is how the student performed at the beginning of the year. And then, well, let's just look here. So the top peel-shaped looking thing is how the students performed at the beginning of the year. So this square right here is going to have students who were well below at the beginning of the year, and then you have below, at, and above benchmark. And it's kind of that cohort of students, and then it divides it up to say, how did at the beginning of the year, those students did well or performed at well below? How are they now at the middle of the year, that group of students? As you hover over it, that's the design of the ALO system. You can hover over it and it will show you the number of students and the percentage. And then also, if you're at a class level, it's going to tell you the name of those students. And you can hover over each one. Now, if you want it to look like the screenshot here with the percentage and the numbers of students at the different levels, you would just you would just go in and print the page. And then as you print the page, it's going to have those percentages and it's going to, the percentages and the number of students in each level. So you're looking at effectiveness for well below and below. And as you're looking at that and you're hovering, you're going to see different students' names. And so you can start to say, okay, there's 6 students here. Who are those 6 students? And you can list those students on how they're doing. So, and the way that the the table is, oops, I went too far. The way the table is designed is you can see the red and the green. The green being that, okay, the students who were well below are now improving to below or, um, yeah, yeah, they move to below benchmark. And then those in red are remaining, whether they at uh, remained at below benchmark or well below. The at was throwing me off. Um, And then there's the same for at benchmark and above benchmark. As you either hover over or do the print screen, and then you can see the students who are in those different areas and list those out to say, okay, who are the students that are falling within these areas? Am I seeing success? Are these students improving and being able to either remain at or above benchmark, or they're moving up? They were well below, now they're moving into either below or at or above. Or are they dropping down for some reason? They've gone from at benchmark, now they're below or well below. So you can start to, we're just taking the data and just putting it here before we start to analyze what might be happening. So in the notebook, or participant notebook, you have reading is on page 5 and math is on page 6, depending on which data you're looking at. And we're going to give you 8 minutes to go through this. Are there any questions before I start the timer that we can help answer? Okay, if you do have questions as you're going through the data, trying to figure out where things are located or what's happening, please feel free to either come off mute and say it out or just enter anything in the chat. Teresa and I will be watching that. So I'm going to start the 8 minutes. And how do I get to the effectiveness tab? All right, great question. So if um, you may be on like a student list. If you click on this A in the top left corner, it'll take you back. Oh, it's a little slow for me today. I'm not sure. I think it's tired for the week. But the A in the top left corner will get you back to that main dashboard page. So, oh, yeah, I'm off mute. Um, if Are you seeing, Crystal, are you seeing some lines over on this left side just below the A? It's a little filter where you can start to select specific, well, I'm at a state level, so there's districts and so on, but you should see where you can select different classes and narrow it down to individual classes.
Awesome. I didn't see that before. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, they try and hide little things around the page, little search and finds. All right, our 8 minutes is up. Oop. And so I am going to stop sharing so that Teresa can take the screen.
Okay, we're going to dive into growth and think about um, how this works with those benchmark levels. So, um, the students that we're the most concerned about should be those students who, when we're looking at our data, have a low proficiency, so a low below or well below benchmark, as well as low growth. Those students are not making progress. They are not ever going to get to benchmark unless we really look at what's going on with that student and start making some changes that have a positive impact. Students who have a high benchmark but a low proficiency, unless they reach that highly skilled learner criteria, could start dropping. And if they continue on that low growth trajectory, they're no longer going to be at benchmark. So those are students we also need to take a look at why they're not making the growth they need to be making. Students who are at high growth but a low proficiency are on the right track. They're closing that achievement gap. They're making progress. So we just need to keep doing what we're doing with those students. Ultimately, we'd love to see students who have a high growth and a high level of proficiency. That means that our system is really effective and we have students that are good readers and also making great progress. Just a quick overview of pathways of progress. So it is comparing students who started the year with the exact same composite score. So these two students had very different composite scores. Their pathways are not going to be compared to each other. Instead, we would have Janie, who would be compared to all other students in first grade who also had a composite score of 90 at the beginning of the year. And then looking to see where did those composite scores end up at the end of the year. And Acadience used years of research of data in order to create these 5 quintiles for progress. The actual growth scores that you put in there for students does not impact the progress, the pathways at all, because pathways is the actual progress the student made. The growth scores that you put into the ALO system are what you would like the student to achieve. And when the system is comparing their progress monitoring, it uses the aim line that is on the student's graph in their growth chart and their growth goal to create that aim line and compare whether or not that progress monitoring is likely for the student to reach the goal or not likely. But the pathway score is actually created by the growth that the student is on. So highly skilled learners may not make typical growth. They're already so far above grade level. If you have a student who meets the highly skilled learner criteria, then and they made less than typical growth, ALO will put a little asterisk next to their pathway and then give them typical growth. So the criteria is on page 9 in your participants notebook. So you're welcome to take a look at that and think about if you have any students that meet that criteria. But ALO will put an asterisk next to their pathway to indicate this was a student who did not make typical growth, but because they met that highly skilled learner criteria, they got typical growth. So what we're going to look at is the effectiveness of growth. So this is the same report that you just looked at with Jared, but instead of using the little rainbows, you're going to select the little pathway icon at the very right side of the screen. This is then going to bring up the data for those same students, but show their growth instead of their benchmark. So looking at this data, we can see that we had 9 students who started the year at a well below benchmark level. And then we can see the fans, which is showing what was their growth. When we're thinking about growth for our well below and below benchmark students, we need to see above typical or well above typical growth. So that's the dark green and the blue fans. If students just make typical growth, what happens is that their trajectory stays at the same distance as their other at and above benchmark peers that are making typical growth. So the achievement gap is not closing at all. They're just making the same level of progress, and the gap between them and their other peers stays exactly the same. So students who are at a well below or below benchmark level have to make above or well above typical growth to start closing that achievement gap and get closer to that benchmark and above benchmark levels. So when we're analyzing the data, we're looking at what percent and number of students and which students fall in these two categories. So looking at this, we can see that we had 2 students that made typical or below growth, and that was 22% of the total. And then I listed the 2 students. We had 7 students, which was 78%, that were making above typical or better growth. You can list them if you want to, but we're really concerned about the students who are making typical or below growth. Those are the students that I'm going to want to investigate. What is happening? Why are they not making the amount of growth that we need them to make? Because all of those students should be receiving interventions and being progress monitored. And so I'd want to go back and look at that progress monitoring data, see what's happening. I'd want to go in and we're going to talk about that. What are some things that we can look at to make changes to help increase the growth for students? This report is really important for second and third and up, because it is a lot harder to move students up a whole benchmark level in a half a year when the gap is so wide. And once you hit about second grade, and definitely after that, the gap in skills can be really wide, and there's a lot of things that the student has to learn. So we want to look at this growth aspect to really think, but are they actually making enough progress? So they may not have moved up a whole benchmark like the last report that we looked at and did the last analysis of just the effectiveness with benchmarks. We want to look at this growth now. So for below benchmark students, I had 3 students. That's at the top here that started the year at a below benchmark level. And then I had 1 student who made below typical growth, and then 2 students who were at that above typical growth level. So I'd want to be looking into Jacob and Delilah and Jayla and looking at what is happening with those 3 students. They're not making enough progress. So we're going to give you 8 minutes to go ahead and complete an analysis of your effectiveness of instruction pathways of progress data. So it's the same chart you were just looking at. You're just going to select the little pathways fan icon at the end, and note for well below and below benchmark, the green is above typical or better growth. The red is typical or below growth. But when you get to your benchmark students and above benchmark, it changes, and green is typical or better growth. So that's the light green, dark green, and blue. And then we're just looking at the below growth is the red and the yellow, because for our benchmark and above benchmark students, making typical growth is just fine. For our below and well below benchmark students, we need them to make above typical growth. Any questions about that? This is on pages 7 and 8 in your participant's notebook. Okay, we'll go ahead and give you 8 minutes. Now that you've had some time to take a look at things, we'd like for you to answer some reflection questions focused around your growth. So this is on page 10. So it's thinking about growth of students, those who did make enough growth, those who didn't, next steps that you could possibly take in thinking about core instruction and also interventions. And really utilizing the growth data that you just looked at to help you make those decisions. We're going to take a look at that effectiveness of instruction report data in just a few minutes. So page 10 in your participants notebook, go ahead and reflect on your growth. And I think this was you now, Jared.
That's what I thought as well. Do you want me to share, or do you want to just keep going?
I'll just keep sharing and you can just tell me next.
All right, sounds good. Makes it easy. All right, so we're going to touch on interventions, and just hopefully a lot of this is more reminders that you've seen before, but the next two slides, we're going to just share some details around interventions and what to consider with interventions. And if you're noticing the data as you've reviewed it today, it's not looking like you would like it to look. There might be some things that you can tweak and look at. And so we're going to share those on the next two slides. So here's one. As you consider on that, in that center section, it applies to both tier 2 and tier 3. And then at the bottom, it just shows the amount of time and how often you might want to progress monitor and how much you're providing instruction to those small groups of students. And one thing I'd like to bring up here, since so with reading, this is more required. With math, progress monitoring has been optional, and people have wondered, what does it look like for math? And it's recommended to just follow what you're doing with reading. So if you're thinking, okay, Acadience math, we want to start to do some progress monitoring and have some small groups, that follow a similar thing for math as you are for reading. And notice some of the as far as you've got, this is an in addition. So we focused a lot of the training, especially at the beginning, was around tier 1 instruction, what you're doing as a whole class. This is in addition to, you're not taking these kids putting them in small groups during the same time that you're providing tier 1 instruction. And then the other one that most people are aware of, but I feel like I need to provide a reminder, is just groups are fluid based on student needs. So that's the point of progress monitoring. As Teresa went through the growth and typical and so on, typical and above and all of that, as you're seeing students make progress and as they're learning the skills that you're instructing them on, there hopefully is going to be some changing in those student needs and the groups. So make sure the way you're doing it, those groups are fluid and can be changed as needed. Next slide. All right, so some other things to think about as you're thinking about your interventions. Now, if you're not doing those at all, these are great things to consider as you put together interventions. If you are doing interventions and you're not noticing the growth that you would like to see, or students, the data, you're wondering what you might tweak. So there's the 3 things that you might consider changing. So how long are you instructing students on a daily basis? How frequent is that instruction taking place? How many days a week? And then how many students are in that group? Do you need to have reduce the number of students, or split a group in half. So considering what you might change. The other thing is about what you need to make sure is happening within those groups. And you can see that there are you providing, so one thing here is it's more about the skills that the Acadience measures. It's not about let's practice the test and give the test do test prep. It's about the skills that students are needing to be able to whether it's reading or math, be successful on future benchmarks. I would also add here, which is it's there, but attendance, yeah, making sure students, maybe they're not attending, and so you're providing it, but they're not there. So thinking about what might happen, and make sure things are happening as much as you can. Next slide. Okay, so we're down towards the end of our time. So we're going to take everything that you've had up until this point, and those pieces that we just talked about, and putting that together, thinking about, okay, what's my instructional plan now? Depending on whether you're a classroom teacher, whether you're a coach, what are the next steps that you're going to take? So we're going to give you some time to do that. There is space to put together that plan on page 10 of the participant notebook. And then after those 8 minutes, what we're going to do is break up into breakout rooms and have you talk with someone else about your plans to get some feedback on, are they noticing some things that might be helpful? So just getting some feedback from someone else is often helpful because they're looking from an outside point of view and they may see things that you're not aware of. So we'll start with 8 minutes to put together some of your plan as far as what are your next steps instructionally, and then we'll jump into getting some feedback from others. And as always, feel free to ask questions as they come up as you're putting that plan together. All right. Okay, we're down to the last part. So we're going to go into breakout rooms, and you'll have one of you will be sharing some information about your thoughts on the plan and discussing that, and then the others will listen and be able to provide thoughts about or give you some feedback related, and hopefully some additional information that they may have. So we will open up the breakout rooms and then go for 10 minutes and then come back together and finish up. Got some good feedback and have some additional information to.
There's still a few people still in the
Oh,
breakout rooms. Okay, now everyone's back.
I got too excited. All right. Trying to rush us through. It is Friday afternoon. So hopefully you got some good feedback on your plan and you have some ideas for steps to move forward. As we are getting ready to finish up, are there any questions? It's always that question where it's like, you don't ask a question, we're going to get done quicker, but do you have questions? That kind of thing on a Friday afternoon. So Teresa and I are here. We're going to stay on a little bit longer. If you have specific questions that you'd like to ask us, or if you want to ask right now, that's great. We'd love to answer any questions. Also, if you have our email and things come up, feel free to email us and ask us any questions that you might have. So I'm going to give some wait time. Any questions that you might have that we can help answer. And as you're considering your questions, Teresa just put in the chat a link to a Google form that we use for the survey. By filling this out, it gives us some feedback as you respond to that. It also kind of marks your name down so that you can get sure, I can't say that word, points to be able to, when you need that, those points at a later time. So please fill out that survey. And also, I was a little late, Teresa, but did we provide the slides?
No, I can drop that in the chat too.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the slides are in the chat if you want those to be able to utilize those and talk through those with a colleague. And then please fill out the Google form for credit and to help us with feedback. And with that, we're finishing up. And like I said, we'll stay on for any questions you might have, but hope you have a great Friday evening and a good weekend.
Thank you.